Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see my presentation on the screen. I'm not switching my video for now because my connection is very bad today. I don't know what's the reason, but I just don't want to risk that. So if there is anything, just shout at me because I can't see anything in the chat box at the moment. So tonight I'm going to bring together two different fields, that is hagiography and magic, in a discussion of a specific textual unit that was widely employed in hagiographic literature of the Christian East. When I encountered this unit in Armenian magical, or rather religious magical texts, I was very much impressed by the longevity on the one hand and the adaptability on the other of this particular unit. The changing function of this unit, I will very soon give it a name, just bear with me, and some examples from Armenian magical texts will be discussed in the third part of my paper. After two introductory parts, I will start with hagiography and this unit, and then I shall offer a brief introduction to the Armenian magic and the main types or formats of magical books where these texts might be encountered. So what is this textual unit that I somewhat mysteriously have not named yet? It might be defined as a hagiographical topos, and this is what I put in the title of my paper, but it's not a topos really. So I would prefer a term borrowed from the studies of Ethiopian hagiographies, a Kikidan. Kikidan is a covenant or pact between God and a saint. I spoke about the origins of Kikidan in Coptic hagiographic literature and its economic dimension in 2016 at the last Coptic Congress, but today I would like to look at this unit from a different perspective and in a different setting, let's say, in Armenian culture. Pilgrims and local residents attending the celebrations held in honor of the saints whose relics were kept at a monastery or at an urban shrine were encouraged to leave some material donations and, if possible, to continue their support to the holy place. This not so subtle encouragement can be easily detected in hagiographical texts, which were read during the liturgical part of the festival or at other suitable moments, a festive meal, agape, for example, and thus comprised an important part of the celebration. The incentive itself was offered in one of the structural elements of hagiographical narratives, this so-called Kikidan. The term Kikidan, as I said earlier, was borrowed from Ethiopic hagiography, where it might be found in many, if not most, literary hagiographic texts. Tadesse Tamrat, a scholar of Ethiopic hagiographies, provides the following definition of Kikidan in Ethiopic hagiography. The cornerstone of the spiritual thieves is the literary formula known as Kikidan, a kind of pact entered into between God and a saint at the completion of his martyrdom or monastic exploits. In these, I'm sorry, I'll have to move my little box here. In this pact, God promises to help both in heaven and on earth all those who make offerings to the church of the saint and in his name. Refrain from physical labor on the days dedicated to the saint, prepare feasts to entertain the clergy and the poor on such days, and go on pilgrimage to the site of his martyrdom, which is thereby proclaimed his holy premises. The followers of the saint who observed these commands and all those who were buried at the site of the saint's holy premises were assured of both earthly and heavenly bliss. The Kikidan is usually placed near the end of a saint's, or more often a martyr's story, right before his or her final execution. If a saint had to undergo a number of deaths, the Kikidan would be introduced before the final one. And for those of you not familiar with Coptic hagiographies, multiple deaths are a completely normal thing. The Kikidan is not reserved solely for the martyr passions, but can also be detected in one form or another in other texts dedicated to the martyrs, for example, in Coptic encomia on St. George, or in a life of a monastic, for example, in the life of Papa Onofrios, famous anchorite. So it might be said that the Kidan is an important structural element of a martyr's story, but not necessarily of a passion. The Kidan found in hagiographic texts might be different in length, from a few sentences to a whole page, but their formulas appear to carry the same message, even though the exact wording might not coincide. Sometimes the Kidan is formulated as a prayer of a saint for those who will observe his cult in the future, as for example in the story of martyr Epima. But more often it is presented as a monologue of Christ himself, or one of the archangels in the last vision of the saint. Sometimes it's just some mysterious voice from heaven, like in the story of the martyr Claudius of Antioch. The formulaic assurances in the Kidan are, on the one hand, cult as to live a pious life and commit acts of charity, but on the other hand is also specific, as they provide these assurances, provide people coming from different social groups with an opportunity to win the saint's favor through doing things that their position or profession enables them to do. So let us now have a closer look at an example of a Kidan in a hagiographic text. I chose the Kidan from a text that I worked on in my doctoral thesis, The Martyrdom of Philophes, but I will also offer samples from other sources, and of course later there will be examples from Armenian texts. The Kidan is preserved in the 9th century manuscript that contains the full text of the martyrdom. The same Kidan is also found in a fragment of this martyrdom kept at the British Library, which I published in 2008, and this is dating from the 11th century. And then there is a smaller part of the Kidan in another fragment of a palimpsest codex, dating from the 9th century as well, from the library of the White Monastery. It was published by Balestri in 1903. So this is a text that has 3 versions, but it's still the same text. So the Kidan begins with a promise of general protection and help for any person who invokes the name of the saint with faith. Everyone who will call upon your name with faith, being in distress or in troubles on earth, if he says, in the name of the God of Saint Philophes, have mercy on me, I will quickly grant him my mercy. And that's, of course, the speech that Christ delivers before the final death of the martyr. Or if he will be in danger of prison or in bonds of iron or in any danger in the sea or in rivers or in danger of murder or theft or in any other trouble of this world, if he calls upon your name and mine with faith, I will help him. This is one of the most frequently used formulaic assurances, probably because dangers brought by the elements or natural disasters and the danger of robbery or theft would be familiar to all members of the audience. A Kidan normally contains a number of promises that might be divided into clusters according to specific groups that they are addressing. So the next assurance in this particular Kidan is addressed to the women in the congregation, and it deals with childbearing. If a woman will call your name and mine with faith while asking for a son, I will give her. And also if she will be in pains of birth, I will ease it for her quickly. The next cluster of promises in the Kidan addresses laity in general. And I guess we could call it a roadmap for those who want to participate in the covenant. It provides a great range of options for charitable deeds, from feeding the poor and bringing offerings to the shrine, to giving a cup of water to a thirsty person, which even the poorest member of the congregation could afford. To him who will feed the poor and hungry in your name, I will act so that he will not be in want of anything that exists on the earth. Him who will give a cup of water in your feast, I will reward sevenfold in my kingdom, and I will not make them any hindrance in anything good on the earth. And if a man plants a vineyard or seeds in the field and calls your name above these plants, I will multiply them and will double their fruits. So you can see the rewards are not only heavenly, not in the next life, but also in this life as well. The promises I quoted coincide with the ones we find with minor differences in a completely different source, the history of Joseph the Carpenter. And here I would like to say a few words about the possible origins of the Kikidan, of this textual element. On the whole, the Kikidan was, the Ethiopic Kikidan, was quite well studied, has been described by scholars of Ethiopic literature, Tadesse Tamrat, Stanislav Kur, Denis Nasnitsin, and others. But little attention has been paid to the same phenomenon in hagiographic literature of other traditions, where it is attested much earlier than in the extant Ethiopic texts. So the exact origins of this literary unit are still not clear, and there is a number of differing opinions on this matter. Thus, a Russian Orientalist of the early 20th century, Boris Turaev, strongly insisted that the Ethiopic Kikidan had its origins in Coptic hagiography. This view is partially shared by Stanislav Kur and by Sergei Frantsuzov, who published in 2011 the Kikidan from the Copto-Arabic version of the life of Saint John the Recluse, Kalivites. I say partially because in a more recent article on a late Christian Arabic manuscript containing some Synaxaric texts, Frantsuzov suggests that we might in fact have to look for the origins of the Kikidan in the earlier layers of Christian literature. And he bases his suggestion on the Kidanic formula found in a Syriac version of the martyrdom of Saint Kyriakos and Julita. But he doesn't really develop this remark, and he just mentions that, and he never says anything more. I did check his reference though, and I really enjoyed reading Alisa Terpeliuk's translation and commentary on the Syriac martyrdom of Saint Kyriakos and Julita. It was published in 2009. But in Russian. But I must say, I was amazed by how much this particular text reminded me of the Coptic martyr stories. If anything, I would say this story came directly from Egypt. All the gory details of the tortures and the whole epic atmosphere reminded me very strongly of Coptic hagiography. The manuscript used by Terpeliuk for her edition, Vatican Syriac 161, was tentatively dated by her to the late 9th, early 10th century. And yes, it does contain a proper Kikidan with promises of protection to the followers of the cult. So there are promises of protection, blessing, and healing to those who will donate to the saint's shrine in the future or commemorate him on his feast days. This is not obviously the earliest or original Kikidan one could find, but it was interesting to see this unit employed in Syriac hagiographic texts because they don't usually have this kind of thing. And naturally, when seeking for the origins of a popular textual unit, which had become extremely formulaic over time, it is very difficult to trace the exact stages and directions of transmissions of such a unit. What one sees in different hagiographic texts preserved in manuscripts and fragments dating from the 7th century onwards already reflects more or less established textual tradition, since some of the formulas used for expressing the promises of the covenant coincide virtually verbatim in texts of different provenance. So where should we look for the origins of these formulaic promises of the Kikidan? I don't have the answer yet, I must confess, but I think that we should look in the earlier layer of Christian literature and in works that belong to a different, not hagiographic group of literary texts, and I mean apocryphal works, especially the one definition of Joost Hagen, or as a revelation dialogues, which seems to me more accurate. A textual unit very close in form to a Kikidan can be found in the so-called history of Joseph the Christ, concerning Joseph, who was venerated as the earthly father of Jesus. I'm not going to discuss this text and its manuscript tradition at length. I would rather refer you to the 1953 article by who has published some previously unattested fragments of the Sahidic Coptic version of the text. So if you're interested, you can always look it up there. There is a consensus based on the four suggestion that was, although Bob Ehrman and Zlatko Pleše in their work on the apocryphal Gospels suggest that it might have been composed in Greek in Byzantine Egypt in the late 6th or early 7th century. Whether or not containing the final promises of Christ to Joseph. Oh, there is something in the chat. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about this bad internet. Okay. There seems to be something very weird going on. Sorry about that. But if I disappear for long periods, just maybe.
Thank God that we have internet, because today in our university they switched off several times. Okay. Go on, please.
Okay. It's just well, a tribulation is the textual unit containing the final promises of Christ to Joseph, which might be, in my opinion, called proto-Kikidan. The promises of this proto-Kikidan contain formulaic assurances to the devotees of Saint Joseph. There are assurances of destruction of the ledger of sins, of protection from various dangers, and of special blessings to anyone who will name their child after Joseph. And these assurances use the same formulas that we have just encountered in the hagiographic Kikidans. For example, and whosoever shall make an offering on the day of your remembrance, him will I bless and recompense in the congregation of the virgins. And whosoever shall give food to the wretched, the poor, the widows, and orphans from the work of his hands, on the day of which your memory shall be celebrated, and in your name, shall not be in want of good things all the days of his life. So you can see, like, there is so many things for us to consider. Like the one you see on the screen right now is this promise given to Saint Philopius, and here is what we can see. Sorry. here is this quote from the history of Joseph. You can see that these formulas, this wording is very much alike, and there's definitely the same structure in this textual unit. There is, of course, a number of differences between the hagiographic Kidans and this proto-Kidan in the history of Joseph. The main of which is that the latter does not refer to the shrine of the saint, while the former almost always mention the shrine, topos, or martyrion of the saint. I will not dwell on the question of the origins of the Kidanic formulas anymore, because I think it requires a different study, a different paper. But there is definitely a connection between these units. And if you have any comments on that, I would like to hear them at the end of the paper. But I would like to draw your attention to a cluster of promises, which, as it seems, might be addressing not the lay people, but the monks and the members of the clergy. Some Kidans promise a special reward to those who copy, write, or read, perform, to the audience, the story of the martyr or of the saint. Since the copying of such texts was carried out mainly in monastic scriptoria, this promise must be addressed to the monks and members of clergy. This is what we read in the fragment from the Palimpsest Codex published by Balistri. For him who will write the book of your martyrdom, so that your powers might be revealed, I will tear the ledger of his sins and will give him to you as a son in my kingdom. Another version of this promise is in the fragment from the collection of the British Museum, and it promises rewards to the person who will perform the martyrdom, who will read. To every person who will read aloud the book of your martyrdom to the people, I will bless him and forgive all his sins. And we will encounter the same promise in the Proto-Kidan, in the history of Joseph. And whosoever shall write the history of your life, of your labor, and your departure from this world, and this narrative that has issued from my mouth, him shall I commit to you, to your keeping, as long as he shall have to do with this life. And when his soul departs from the body, and when he must leave this world, I will burn the book of his sins, nor will I torment him with any punishment in the day of judgment, but he shall cross the sea of flames and shall go through it without trouble or pain. So the copying moment seems to be extremely important for those who are continuing the tradition of a specific saint. So the more people copy or sponsor the copying or read it out, remind about the saint to the congregation, the more popular the saint becomes, or maybe the more support the shrine will get. Again, it's interesting that the history of Joseph does not contain the mention of a shrine at all, but it contains this reward, the promise of a reward for anyone who will write the history of the life of Saint Joseph. So having briefly discussed the formulas of a Kidan, there are many more, I'm just omitting them. We might argue that the main aims of the insertion of a Kidan into a saint's life are to promote the cult of the saint, to establish the authority of the saint's shrine, his topos or her topos, to attract more devotees, since the promises of earthly and heavenly rewards for the followers of the cult in the Kidan are usually worded in such way, to use Tamrat's observation, as to appeal to as wide a variety of clients as possible, from the kings down to the simplest of peasants. And also, I think one of the aims was to encourage donations and various forms of support for the shrine. And we can see that such incentives were really effective, since there is a huge amount of evidence, literary texts, documentary texts, and material artifacts showing how much support the shrines received from the pilgrims and local residents. I've said earlier that a Kikidan is a popular textual unit, and I have shown you some examples of Kidans in Coptic and Syriac sources, not to mention the very well-studied Ethiopic Kikidan. But I must emphasize that although popular, it was not universal. We do not come across such formulaic units, such Kidans, in all the traditions of the Christian East and at any given point of time. For example, you would not necessarily find a Kikidan in the hagiographies of Georgian or Armenian saints, nor will you find one in the later Coptic hagiographies. So it disappears, it falls out of use. There are many factors that might prevent an inclusion of a Kikidan in a saint's story. The approach to composing the lives of saints might be different in a particular tradition. Maybe there was no need to promote the saints' shrines. Maybe there were just different ways of connecting a saint with his or her followers. Maybe some traditions, and I think we can securely say that regarding the Byzantine tradition, that it saw this kind of pact as something not 100% orthodox. Well, Turaev bluntly defines Kikidan as heretical from the Orthodox point of view. So it might be that more censored forms of writing, hagiographies, just didn't see it necessary to include this kind of textual element into the story of the saint. At this point, you're probably wondering, okay, we got that. We know what a Kikidan is now, but where is magic in that? These promises look very innocent, maybe just very slightly heretical to the purists of the kind of Turaev. But the most interesting thing is that Coptic magic tradition did not assimilate this textual element at all. We do not come across these promises in Coptic magical texts. Maybe because they were too innocent, and Coptic magic uses lots of historiole from its ancient Egyptian and Greco-Roman heritage. Maybe there was a different reason, but Armenian tradition, on the other hand, did use this textual element. And here we turn our attention to the Armenian magical tradition and its special features. Although there is a number of good monographs and articles on the subject of magic in Armenian culture, there isn't yet any modern comprehensive work, and that is really an omission, I think. Apart from a collection of articles by Sarkis Harutyunyan, published in Armenian in Yerevan in 2006. That's number 1 on my selected bibliography list here. Most of the scholars look at Armenian magical practices from a perspective of folklore studies. And this is an approach that scholarly tradition inherited from the great Manuk Abegyan. He published a magnificent work in 1899, Der Armenische Volksglaube, and it appeared first in German, then it was translated into Armenian, and then recently it was translated into English, but hasn't been published in any force. It's just on the internet. But the majority of studies look at let's say, different parts of this magical traditions. So there is a number of very good publications, articles, monographs even. There is a master's thesis, I will mention it just a little bit later, that look at the art history in this tradition. They discuss the images used, the techniques and so on that is used in the production of Armenian magic amulets or artifacts. There is also a number of scholars who are studying the integration of the Armenian magic into the Iranian substratum of the Armenian culture, or maybe in like the Iranian world, like James Russell likes to look for the pagan roots of the Armenian magic tradition. And of course, this has its own, it's a good approach, it's a good perspective, but unfortunately, it doesn't look at the at the part of the Armenian magic tradition that might be called Christian magic. And that is, I think, an omission, and it's something that people should really study. I would also recommend to those of you who are interested in the Armenian magic, a very good article by Sergio Laporta, Sorcerers, Witches and Weasels, Grigor Tatevatsi's definition of the magical arts, because he offers a very good overview of different types of magical practices that are attested in the works of Grigor Tatevatsi and other Armenian writers, starting from the 5th century. So we can't say that this is completely understudied or neglected field, but as I said, there is a need for a comprehensive work, for an overview of this tradition. Another very important work, which has already been mentioned by Alexei, is the work of Frederick Feydi, the Amulets of Christian Armenia. It was an adventure to hunt it, and I'm very thankful to Alexei for introducing me to this book, because it actually brought me into the field. But it also has its own limitations. It is a publication or edition with a French translation of texts contained in Armenian prayer scrolls that are mainly kept at the Saint Lazaro library, and also at other a few other libraries. So it's mainly concerned with the Saint Lazaro collection. It is a very good, of course, a very good book, but as I said, it doesn't offer a commentary or an analysis. So that's a very good tool for anyone who wants to check certain things or references, but it's lacking what we might say a structural approach. So this is something that maybe someone should add to this wonderful edition. There is also a number of works that kind of follow Feydi's approach, Feydi's pattern, like Edda Vardanyan, who published an article on the fragments of magical scrolls in one of the French museums. I can't remember exactly which one. Other things, and also there is a very good work, but it's again in Armenian, by David Khazaryan, and it's a study of the prayer scrolls and their imagery and artistic features. So I do hope that he will take part in the seminar at some point and maybe present his own research. It's very interesting, and some things that he speaks about in his work are just mind-blowing. I didn't know about this, and it's very interesting. So I gave you a short overview, introduction to the study of the Armenian magic. And now I want to say a few words about the magic itself, the tradition of magical practices in Christian Armenia. There are two main formats that of books that contain magic texts or descriptions of magical practices. And one of them is called Hmail, and it's a prayer scroll or amulet. They begin appearing from the 17th century, mainly, although there are earlier examples. And the earliest is dated 1428. It's the only one of its kind. And there was a master's thesis defended on it by a scholar from Jerusalem, from Israel, but it hasn't been published. Mainly they were produced on paper, but there are some on other materials. And of course, paper is not a very strong and not a very, durable, yes, thank you. I completely forgot the word. Not a very durable material. So maybe it explains the reason why there are not any earlier examples of that. But on the other hand, we do have so many other things that appeared in the 15th, 16th century, and it's kind of weird that there is this explosion of this production. They also were printed as, and they continued to be printed up to the 19th, to the end of the 19th century. And in that case, they were hand painted to look more similar to a handwritten document. So it's another interesting point. They are, we might say, a collection of texts which are completely, as I said, innocent, totally orthodox. It's a collection of prayers. However, they do have magical properties or features that would actually place them into the category of religious magical texts or church religious, church magical texts. Apparently they were allowed or they were not prohibited by the church authorities, because sometimes we do have in the colophons the names of the people who copied them, and those would be names of the clergy. But as I said, there are some features that do not allow us to say that they're absolutely, like 100% orthodox. They usually contain a number of miniatures, beautiful paintings or not so beautiful, but this one is really good. This one comes from the collection of the Russian State Library. It has been described by Mikhail Arakelian. He kindly shared his catalog that hasn't been yet published, and I'm very thankful to him. But we don't really know much about the tradition of the ordering of the prayers. So there is always a number of prayers that appear in every scroll, in every amulet, but there is also a number of prayers that might be different, that might be absent in one scroll or might appear in a different scroll. So this is a case with this particular Crimean scroll. As I said, it does have some wonderful pictures, and they remind us of the Aramaic magic tradition of.
Sorry, they remind us of
the first
of
the Aramaic
yes,
magical tradition.
It was lost. Okay.
I think, yeah, exactly. I took these pictures because they actually were featured in your talk. Not exactly these pictures, but typologically it's the same, of course. It's usually a saint piercing a demon, or in this case it's an archangel. The description of the sacrifice of Abraham and so on. So these are the elements that are always in a scroll. But there are others, and there is a different format, and this is a completely different tradition, I think. And I think this is, well, influenced by the Arabic magic tradition, unlike the scrolls that are obviously influenced by the Aramaic Christian tradition. This one is a spell book, Achtark, and we don't know anything about the place about the provenance of this codex or the name of the sponsor or scribe, so it's all a mystery. There are no colophons, and the dating is very tentative, but still it's a very good example of a different type of magic that one encounters. So this particular spell book contains 7 different parts. They include magical texts, spells, incantations, diagrams, magical signs, and all kinds of weird stuff, one might say. So this is definitely something that was not approved of in the by the clergy of the Armenian Church. So the first part of this book is magic formulas against the evil spirits, against the demons. And it's a translation from Arabic. The funny thing is that the title of this section attributes all the texts in this section to Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. The second part is a treatise on the 12 signs of Zodiac, the 12 nations, and parts of human body. And this is attributed to Saint Ambrose of Milan, of all people. I have no idea why. Then there is an excerpt from Arakel-Sunitsi, because there was a theological work on the 12 signs of Zodiac by Arakel-Sunitsi, and it is a verse poem. So there is that part. Then there is an astrology manual, and it is copied not in Grabar, so it's not classical Armenian, but Middle Armenian. Another part, the next part, it's part 5, is how to understand whether this is a good day. So again, one might say astrology or divination. Then there is a part in Turkish, but written with Armenian script. So Gashuni, one might say, again, astrology. And the last bit is just miscellany of magic formulas, recipes, all kinds of advices of how to protect yourself from evil spirits or evil eye. So as I would say, it's a miscellany. We have exactly the same type of miscellanies in the St. Petersburg collections. They are described by Karen Yuzbashan. So if you're interested, I would again refer you to his work. So it's not something unusual, or it's not so massively produced as the scrolls, but there are copies, and they are made by whoever knows who. I mean, it couldn't be the clergy, because it's obviously something that has been prohibited by multiple canons of the Armenian synods, and it's something that is very openly banned in the Armenian Church. But still, we do have copies of this kind of works. Here are some examples from this codex. And if you look at the right side of the image, you can see that there are kind of magic signs with little circles. You can see them here. I think they don't have any meaning in themselves. That they're just like voces magicae. Another part, and this is obviously, it very much reminds us of magical drawings in other traditions, in the Arabic tradition, in Ethiopic tradition, especially this one-eyed creature in the middle. And on the right page, you can see there is like a whole section of this nonsensical script, one might say. But it takes up a good portion of the book. So it's not just one page or something. It's, I would say, 20 pages maybe. And as I said, the problem with this production of amulets, talismans, is a very early problem, and it has been addressed already in the 5th century. So this is something that definitely began before the Christian era in Armenia and continued throughout the Christianization of Armenia and throughout its history as a Christian state. Maybe in different degrees, in different forms, but this is a quote from a writer of the 5th century, or maybe 7th century. Sergio Laporta follows the dating of Garit, who for some reason thinks that this particular homily or letter should be attributed to Hovhannes Mairagometsi. So they I don't know why, I didn't find his arguments convincing, so I think it's should be attributed to Hovhannes Mandakuni, the 5th century writer. And it's a whole homily. It has been translated into Russian in a very good way by Lucine Stepanyan, I think. I can't remember. I have it somewhere. So I did an English translation from the original text, but I did look at how she translated a couple of things there. And what he says is that those who produce amulets, talismans, insert names unheard of in the commandments. That must be the names of the demons probably, or some, magic names or whatever. And they mix them with the name of Christ so that those writings would look godly as the word of God. Such impudence was encouraged in them by Satan, that they dare mention the holy name of God in their witching spells and put them into talismans. But this is not done for the glory of God. So what he says is that there are people who take the texts or prayers or whatever, and they mix them with the names of demons or some other names that might be the names of pagan deities or whatever. And they make it look as if this is a Christian text. And this is, I think, typologically, maybe it's not exactly the same, but this is what we see in those scrolls, because they do have certain features that sometimes just make them magical, that make them apotropaic in their nature. For example, there is, if you look at the background of my PowerPoint, you can see the writings written in a crisscross manner, in a diagonal crisscross manner. This is the way to write the description of the sacrifice of Abraham. This is always written in the scrolls like that. So, of course, it's done with a purpose. It must have its own meaning. And David Khazarian thinks that this is done in order to make it look like a sign of cross. Other scholars think that this is done in order to make it look like a grill or a protective sign. So there is no consensus on that matter, but obviously this is a magic feature of a scroll. So it places it, as I said, in a category of magic religious texts. And here we come to the connecting point of hagiography and magic, to the saints. In prayer scrolls, we very often have these images of martyrs, and usually it's Saint George, of course, because he is the main protector from evil spirits and other tribulations. There are also images of Saint Sarkis, Saint Martyr Sarkis, and he is here on the left. Other martyrs as well, Saint Sicinius, our old friend, and others, but these two are almost always featured in prayer scrolls. And what is interesting is that what follows the message, the image, and that's a prayer which is based on the Kidan. I didn't have time to retype everything, so I just copied quotation from Eva Balitska-Bitakovska, who quotes the prayer of martyr Antiochos of Sebaste. And if you look at that, you can see the familiar formulas. Those who remember me and fulfill my memorial, you, Lord, fulfill all their requests. And there was a voice from heaven saying, those who remember you in the mountains and in the fields, in the rivers and in the seas, during wars and in other places, they will be saved from tribulations. As you can see, it's exactly the same textual unit, and it's delivered by the voice from heaven. Another quote, it's a long one, it's a prayer to St. George, and it's very often used in the prayer scrolls. And again, the prayer, this time, this Kidan is represented as a prayer of the saint for his followers. Lord, give grace through my name and my bones in my vivification. Call every misfortune and fury of the world in the home and abroad, even on the day of battle and war with the visible and invisible enemy, and wherever my name is remembered, may there be neither aridity nor loss of fruit, and so on. You can see it yourself. I mean, this is definitely a Kidan. Another one, that's from PD, and sorry, I didn't have time to put an English translation, but it's exactly the same. It's a prayer to St. George which is based on the Kidan. So what I want to say is, it is a very weird, in my opinion, place to meet the Kidan, the Kidanic formulas of all the places, because St. George, St. Antiochos are not Armenian saints. They are universal saints. They are the saints of the ancient church. And yet we encounter these formulas taken from the hagiographies in the Armenian prayer scrolls. And obviously they are used as a historiole in this text. They perform the function of a desired outcome in a sympathetic way. So as it was in your promise to me, says the saint, make it to my followers, to those who use my name. Of course, this is something that needs a different study. And as I said, this is something I'm only starting. So this is my work in progress. And I would be very grateful for your comments and remarks. But I think this is a very interesting example of the longevity and adaptability of hagiography in magic. And here I think I should finish because I have overused your patience. And these are just some selected entries on the Kidan, and something on magic, and just another beautiful picture from this wonderful prayer scroll from Crimea in the collection of the Russian State Library. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting and mind-provoking. We have some questions in chat, and I would like to support one of the questions. It is about the inner etymology of the word Kidan. Is there any guess what does it come from?
This is a question that must be asked to the scholars of Ge'ez. I have no idea really.
Yes. I mean, it's not Armenian.
I mean, it must be,
Yes,
there must
yes.
be something in it, but I never thought about it. I mean, people who are doing Arabic came to me with their suggestions that this must come from this particular Arabic root or this one, and I never know what to say because I'm not a linguist. So it might be.
Mhm, mhm. So, dear colleagues, ask your questions, comments, and so on, please. I'm sorry of intruding first.
No. It's I'm just looking at the chat box, and there was a question from Anna Cherkashina about this word Kikidan. As I said, I have no idea. I would be very grateful for your comments. Then there is a comment from David Calabro, and he says, with the Syriac Book of Protection, also the copies were genuine priests. I think it's a universal rule. The ones who were literate were usually from the clergy. It's not, I mean, we can't say it's 100%, but I do think there was some kind of, hidden business going on. So it's the whole clergy, I mean, the whole hierarchy with the whole might of, homilies, canons, prohibitions, and so on, comes on the people who are doing magic, and it's still there. It's still alive. So it's very, very durable, we can say.
There is a question from Erica Hunter. Erica,
yes.
would you
hello, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Right, Kikidan, I will look up the etymology in Ge'ez, but in the examples which you have shown us, and I don't read Armenian, so I couldn't read the title, do they have a specific term that commences the prayer? For example, in Syriac, the Kikidan always has a very specific term called the harama or the anathema. And that term in the title of the prayer amulet will tell you that it is, and I'm going to look into the Kikidan as a useful term to explain the covenant between God and the saint. And so the writers of these prayer amulets, who were usually priests, would recognize that they were a specific genre. There are different genres of prayer amulets, but the intercession between the saint and Christ or God, usually in the Syriac, has a very specific title, the harama or the anathema. And we have examples of that. We have one example, or maybe two examples, but certainly one example from Turfan, which is 12th or 13th century, a Syriac. I published it. So I would be interested to know what term the Armenian amulets actually use if you have the title, because they usually have a title to the prayer amulet.
As I said, this type of amulets, the phylactery, is called Hmail, and it might be translated as a divination or whatever. It doesn't have any.
What do they use in the title? Do they use a term?
It's just a prayer, a hotek. So it's always a hotek, or barechosutiam, the blessing. So usually it's just the prayer of this and this, the prayer of that and that. Nothing suspicious, I would say.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the copyists themselves recognize different genres of material, and they show that in the title, at least in the Syriac tradition, they show that.
I got your point, but not in the Armenian.
Right.
They treat it as the same type of text. So it's always a hotek, the prayer, it just means prayer, or barechosutiam, which is a blessing. So it's a prayer of St. Gregory of Narek, it's always there, whatever, or a blessing taken from St. Narcisse or whatever. So they don't treat it as a protective, as a special text, you know what I mean? they see it as a prayer. And inside they include whatever they want.
Well, that's a difference to the Syriac text where,
I guess so,
for example, the Book of Protection, which David Calabro has mentioned several times, you have different categories. And I wrote many years ago an article on the genres, because you can actually see by the titles and the form critical structures, they have different types. And the anathema is, and it's very interesting to pick up this universal type. The anathema is important, but there are others that are bindings, and that's of course indicated by certain other terms. So you can actually see by the titles of the prayer amulets what the sort of genre is, or generally speaking, not always. And it will say the anathema of such and such a saint useful for, and then it will specify what might be used for. So anyway, it's just a little point about the Kikidan, but it's an interesting concept. And I'll look up in the Ge'ez.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And one might think that since the Armenian tradition is obviously very close to the Syriac tradition, we would see many similarities, but no, we don't. I mean, there are, of course, typological similarities. And as I said, there is, for example, the Saint Cecilius legend in the Armenian tradition, but the titles are different. The titles are different, and the approach is different. I saw in the chat box a very interesting comment from Anna Cherkashina. Yes. Maybe you could elaborate yourself. It's so interesting. I didn't think about it, about the Kikidan.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your lecture. It was very, very inspiring and interesting. I just mentioned this probability when I heard this word and what is this supposed to mean in Armenian. I thought it could be related, but of course this is a very far related languages, but still this similarity is striking for me. The meaning I have checked in Chicago Syrian dictionary.
We should ask someone.
Yes, probably John can comment on this idea.
Yes, exactly.
So
okay.
There is
I want to second it. Essentially,
there is a file.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Essentially, all right. What you found in the Chicago Syrian dictionary is a word that sounds very good for this. All right. What you have in your Kikidan is a grant of privileges, essentially, from a higher authority to lower authorities that exempt them from certain things that they would otherwise have to endure. And what we have in Akkadian is a word for Kidinu, which is exactly the same idea. A higher authority, usually the king, grants to a cultic center certain privileges that exempt them from taxes and otherwise government control of various kinds. It's Kidinu, and that is very likely. So I'm going to second Anna on that suggestion.
I'm sorry. David Calabro shared.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I never thought about that. I never thought about the etymology.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
He shared with us a page from Leslau's dictionary, but I don't actually see their etymology. I see the discussion, but I don't see the etymology. But there should be something there.
Yeah, if I may. So I don't think Leslau mentions the Akkadian one that Joanne mentioned, but at the bottom there is some on Semitic, the Semitic and Ethiopic, and he mentions Arabic kadda. No, I'm sorry. I think I'm looking at the wrong one actually.
Oh, yeah.
Let me scroll down. Yeah, it goes into the second column there. So maybe I'll let me share that as well. He only, in this case, cites Ethiopic connections. So
thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any other Semitic
We'll
comparison.
look ourselves into Leslau's dictionary. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for reference. Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
So actually, in Syriac text and in Aramaic text, we have these pacts, you know, these treaties with the deity, but they don't have their special term. And it is very interesting that Ethiopic and Armenian tradition has this, you know, terminology, this specific terminology. It's very interesting. So, any other questions?
There is a question from David Gasparian about the unclear signs in the magic texts.
Okay.
And he asks whether it is cryptography or hieroglyphic signs. It's neither. I mean, some parts, yeah. Well, because we discussed this specific codex with Mikhail Arakelian, who studied it. He spent a lot of time working on it. And he, at first, he also thought that this might be a cipher, cryptography. But then he realized that this is actually, well, kind of an attempt to recreate what we call characteres, which is totally weird for an Armenian culture because it doesn't have the concept of characteres, but they are there. That's why I think that this tradition, this kind of the one that is represented in the Akhtar, it is influenced by the Arabic magical tradition. Sure. Because characteres actually come from one might say Mesopotamian. Definitely they were in the Egyptian magic. It's their trademark. Characteres don't mean anything. They are just there to make it look like a symbol, like a protective or apotropaic symbol, like something mysterious. So I do think this is an example of characteres in the Armenian text, which is very interesting.
So I just wanted to add that it is not the task of Armenian, magic scholar of Armenian magic. It's universal phenomenon. It should be, studied in Coptic and where it is in Egyptian and in Arabic.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, no, it's definitely very unusual for Armenian. Mm-hmm. That's what I meant. I mean, we have it in great numbers in the Coptic magic, in Greco-Roman magic from Egypt, but we don't have it. I mean, it doesn't. The concept is not native to the Armenian culture. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, it's very interesting. Yes, in Jewish magical texts, I mean, Near East, Levantine, whatever, I don't know. I mean, Armenia is definitely very different. It has this Iranian influence, but not the Egyptian or Jewish. So I think this must be the consequences of the Arabic conquest. Maybe not. Maybe it's something that came from Turkey.
Yes. My own problem
Sorry,
with
I can't hear you.
Tradition, when I looked through various texts, that it is not unified of sorts. Yes, because talking about the Syriac tradition, it almost all of it comes from Kurdistan or Azerbaijan. I mean, from these Eastern Syriac communities, and it goes from sort of certain region. But Armenian tradition is possibly comes from from any place in the Near East, and it is not so unified. Is it? Yeah.
No, it's definitely not unified. It's it varies because there are also different regional traditions, and yes, they differ. And I guess it's just a hypothesis, but I think there was, let's say, an indigenous Armenian magic tradition which had its roots in the pre-Christian Armenian folklore, Iranian religion, whatever, Zoroastrianism, and the mixture of beliefs that are attested by Manuka began. And there was another strain that began to form after the Arabic conquest and the inclusion of Armenia into the wider circle of the Near East traditions, because the problem is we don't have anything early, so we can't say what was there in the 10th century. We only have descriptions, very scant ones, in the works of Hovhannes Mandakuni or Mayra Gometsi, whatever. It's 5th or 7th century, and he describes certain practices, but they don't look like anything Arabic. I mean, he doesn't really say what was in those scrolls. He only mentions that there were scrolls and that they contained those wrong names mixed with the name of Christ. But that's all. He doesn't say anything else. And we also have the canons of the Shahapivan Synod, which condemns magic and introduces fines and punishments for those who practice it, but that's all. We don't have any material evidence, so we don't know what was there. So it's very difficult to say. I mean, of course, if there was more work done, it might be, we might get some new data, but it's something that's only beginning, let's say.
Thank you. People, I would spend hours talking with you, but probably we have to finish if you don't have any questions. Join us. Anna, do you have a question? Please.
No, there was a comment by Erica Hunter.
Sorry.
Oh yes, there is a comment about the Syriac tradition of the
We
anathema.
have very limited material. It's quite right that most of it is 17th century onwards, probably for the very reasons that have been explained, fragility of material. But we do have from Turfan a medieval anathema, and there are others. I'm working on them as well. And Hidemi Takahashi has also a Syriac prayer amulet from the Otani collection from Turfan that's probably the same date. And we have in the British Library, written on the flyleaf of a manuscript that's dated to the 9th, 10th century, another anathema to Martamzis. So we do have a very small number, less than a handful, of certainly the anathema from the 10th to the 13th century. And these take back what must have been, take back the tradition from the 17th, 18th century to much earlier times. Unfortunately, where it was the durability of the material means, of course, it's very, very difficult to preserve. But I'm quite confident that these items were in production in quite widespread in the medieval period.
Of course, yes. There should be thousands of this.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Absolutely, absolutely. I think there was a lot of it, but paper, not papyrus, unfortunately, not so durable.
Paper.
Okay, dear friends, thank you for coming for the interesting discussion. I invite you to join us in 2 weeks for a talk by Joanne Scurlock. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Bye.